Hi everyone, this is Susan J Chen, and this is How I Create.
Welcome to This Is How We Create, a show that digs deeper into the creative life of contemporary artists of color. Discover what feeds their creativity and how they found or are finding their artistic voice. Through these intimate and candid conversations, you'll gain insights into the lives of creative professionals of color that are hard to find anywhere else. Today on the show, we have Susan J Chen, who joins me to talk about her history and her drive to create. Susan shares how she came to develop her moody and cinematic style. Our conversation starts with her inspiration as a young girl. We flash forward to her seeing the devastation of the Twin Towers on 9/11 firsthand. Towards the end of our time together, Susan talks about the shuffle she does to create and to earn a living. Happy listening. We do have adult language in this episode, so you may not want to have a listen with kiddies around. My guest today is Susan J Chen, an award-winning photographer whose work bridges the commercial and fine art world. Susan uses a conceptual approach to fashion, portraits, things, and motion. Her work has been described as cinematic, moody, and emotionally charged with color and dark humor. Susan was chosen by Saatchi Art as one of the top 100 women artists in the world. Her work has been shown in New York, LA, San Francisco, Minneapolis, Tokyo, Miami, and Cataluna, Spain. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Martine. It's great to see you.
It's so good to see you again. And I think last time I saw you was it last year in Palm Springs, correct?
This was, yes, last year, a rooftop, drinks in our hands, sun on our faces. Wasn't just life just much more simple back then?
Yes, it was. So,
Can
dear
we just go
listener,
back there?
I know. We are recording this interview on June 26th, and we are still in quarantine. I think there are some states that were coming out, and now we're all going back in to
That's right.
quarantine.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah, but one day we're going to meet up again.
It was really fun to go to Palm Springs to the Palm Springs Photo Festival and to make this little group of wonderful ladies that were so supportive of each other and hung out during this festival. And we got into some fun. We had fun.
Yes. Yes, it was.
I love your work, Susan, and I think one of the reasons why I love your work is because there's so much emotion in it and there's such a story in it and it makes you want to be the character. You have so much compassion for the character and then you kind of also don't want to be your characters all at the same time.
Yes, yes. So you're not scared off by the dark humor of it all.
I'm not. I'm not at all. And we will get to that later on in the podcast. But to the point of dark humor, I'd love to hear what you were like as a child. So we'll go way back. And were you a Sunday type of girl?
Well, I can tell you, I wasn't the kind of girl that, played Barbie and dolls and stuff. I was, playing with bugs and rolling around the dirt and getting dirty and just into weird things. I was a little bit of a fantasy nerd. I read a lot of fantasy type books like Chronicles of Narnia, and I got into Dungeons and Dragons, so I was a total nerd as a kid.
I wasn't that way either.
Yeah.
No, not at all. I was more of the very athletic and let's go out and get our
Yeah.
knees scraped type of girl.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. I used to go climb trees and ride bicycles and jump off rooftops.
and where did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California, south of Los Angeles. So,
So you're one of the few
uh,
true
yeah,
blue.
I'm a California girl. I am. You wouldn't be able to tell by my work, could you? Because I really always admire looking at lifestyle photographers, and it's always sun kissed, it's golden and bright and pretty. And my work doesn't look like that at all. I mean, from my work, it looks like I grew up in like a, cold and dreary place, like England or something.
Well, I think that your work, some of it, especially, I think most of us are familiar with your fairy tale series.
Yes.
And that does look like it's just been ripped from the page of a book. So I think we all have our eye, right? We see the world the way we see it because that's what makes us special.
I guess, right? I always like felt like, why? How come I'm taking all these dark pictures? Why aren't I taking, these beautiful pictures of people smiling and, with the sun behind them and, and all that sort of warm feeling. But I just can't see that way. I just doesn't come out that way for me. Even though I love it, I love the sunshine, I like going to the beach like any other normal person. It just creatively, that's not how I think.
Can we dig
Um,
into that a little bit? Because
yeah,
I'm so
sure.
fascinated by what you just said about it just doesn't feel right and that's not how you think. And for me, the reason for that is that as artists, sometimes we try to be like other artists, right? Like we see
Uh-huh.
someone whose work is so inspirational, and so then we want to be like that person, but the
Hmm.
reality is that we'll never be that person because that person is who they are. And it sounds like
Yeah.
such a cliche thing to say, but I guess one of my question for you is how have you reached a point where you made the decision to be you instead of trying to be something
Yeah.
that you want to do but that didn't quite feel right?
Yeah, I think I always felt to be able to work in commercial fields that I'd have to shoot something a little bit more bright and cheery and, easier to take in and not so, but it just felt I just felt like I always wanted to do stuff like that, but it just doesn't come naturally to me. So I guess what I'm saying is that I've only known to shoot for myself. I haven't been I don't know if I would be able to succeed if I were to try to shoot for somebody who I didn't share a common vision with. It's just people, if you asked 10 people to shoot the same thing, you would get 10 different pictures. Everybody sees things differently. And I think that's part of the journey of a photographer is finding your personal vision. I got into photography, when I was a teenager. My high school actually offered a photography class. So I learned on film. That's how old I am. Yeah, and I learned in the dark room. I loved the dark room. And actually some of my favorite things about the dark room is when you need to, you know, if you've ever worked, have you ever worked in the dark room
I
yourself?
have. That's how
You
I
have?
learned.
Yeah, yeah.
When
So you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you mean. And
Yeah.
when you tell people about dodging and burning, people who've
Yeah.
never actually been in darkroom, they're like, "What?"
Yeah. Oh, it's so sad. I had a conversation with my nephew the other day. He's like 17 and he's starting to get into photography. And I said the word dark room and he didn't know what I was talking about. He didn't know what that was. I know, it's so sad, right? But one of my favorite things I remember about being in the dark room was going into the black room where you're downloading the film, and it's complete blackness. Yet you can't see up, down, left, right. You're if floating in space, basically. That's one of my favorite feelings in the world, and it's been a while since I've been in one of those.
Oh,
But
and
isn't
then
that a weird? Yes.
putting the film on the spool and then
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
and feeling it so that you can make sure that and I'm doing the people can't see me, but I'm doing the motion to make
Yeah.
sure that it's not crinkling so that when you put it into the when you start put it in the developer that you're
Yep.
actually
Yep.
doing the job. But you know what I want to do? We're geeking out here.
Yeah.
You know the clock for
Mhm.
developing your film.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
find that. And now that I've said
Oh, that's a
it,
great idea.
someone's gonna go on eBay and buy it
Ye
all.
Oh,
But I want to
totally.
have the it's just because it's like it's so beautiful. It's so graphic.
Yes.
And I've stared at that so many times, like shaking,
Yep. Yep.
and
Yep.
then waiting the however many
Yep.
seconds, and then shaking again.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. Don't you I miss some of those rituals. That's a great idea. You should totally eBay that.
I think I will.
Yeah, so I fell into photography, as a kid, and I started shooting like empty parking lots with that night glow, from the fluorescent lights, those desolate gasoline stations, and looking at pictures like that, and sort of solo solitude sort of kind of conveyed. It's just beautiful, almost painterly like images. So that's the kind of mood I've always been drawn to, is sort of, that moodiness of nighttime ambient light. It's just has this beautiful greens and reds, and I've always been drawn to stuff like that. I have to tell you, I'm heavily influenced by just, I think, initially it was actually film and music is what got me into photography first, rather than photography. I just wasn't educated, in photography. So I got more inspired by, I was a film nerd too. So I used to watch a lot of foreign films, and a lot of filmmakers had a huge influence on my look and style. And you'll see it too in modern fairy tales. There's a lot of pop culture references in there. For instance, the image of Alice in Wonderland is a take on a vampire show. What's it called? True
True
Blood.
Blood.
Yes, because you see, it's a very white, pale image, but just the bright, vibrant red lips. So that's all stuff that has sort of gotten into my brain at some point. Hitchcock. There's some Hitchcock in there. There's some Wes Anderson influence in there. 6 Feet Under.
6 Feet Under, really?
Yeah. Yeah, you remember that TV show?
I
It was like,
do, and I haven't seen it, but I've been thinking about 6 Feet Under and watching it again, just because there was this New York Times article a few weeks ago about people who work in the funeral
mm-hmm,
business.
mm-hmm.
And specifically, the article was talking about how few women there are and a few people of color there are. And so then I started thinking about 6 Feet Under, and I started thinking about, I wonder how much diversity there was in that show. But tell me more.
There wasn't any.
There usually
wasn't
isn't.
any diversity. I think there's like one black cop. No, but I loved that show though. It was just a little bit of the kind of dark humor that I like, because that show is very dark, but it's got its black humor in it too. Every show begins with a death. It opens with a death. Yeah. So, I loved it for its original, tone and dark humor. So I just love that kind of stuff. As dark as my stuff can get, I also have a very like silly side as well. I have a second Instagram profile to separate all the other kind of comedy silliness stuff. I draw on things that have faces, and I have a silly side and a fun side, as in addition to the dark stuff.
But I remember seeing your project Postcard from Home, and that's just really silly.
Yeah, it's
And
hilarious, right?
can you tell
It's
us
super cute.
can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, that Postcards from Home is different from my main body of work, as you can tell, because it's very funny and bright, and maybe even kids could read it. It's a fun little side project I started when friends of mine were traveling for a long period of time, and they said, "Say, hey, Susan, why don't you come stay at our place and you can dog sit for Atticus?" Atticus was 4 years old at the time, Boston Terrier. So he and I just hung out, and I just started to notice that he just kept staring at me all day. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try putting a camera in front of you, see what happens, right? And I just noticed, like, it was just golden. He had this like very laser-eyed focus. He was so good in front of the camera, and I was like, this dog is, not all dogs look at the camera like that. They don't have the focus. He does. So I decided to photograph a picture each day, write a little story in his voice, and I sent it to his traveling friend, his traveling parents each day. And I called, and I, did some 50 shots by the end, and called the whole body of work Postcards from Home.
Do you remember some of the captions? Because they're so
Yeah,
funny.
they are funny, right? I wrote it in the sort of, in the tone of a small dog that just doesn't understand why his parents would leave him. So he goes through all these emotional arcs, like disbelief in the beginning, to kind of rebellious anger, and then to like, okay, you're gone, I'm gonna party. And then so he kind of goes through all that, and then at the end of the story he starts to miss them, and then he starts writing in this very longing kind of I miss you kind of voice. So he just kind of he covers the whole kind of arc of what it feels like to be left home alone. It was a great series. People love it. It's I'd love to publish that into a book one day.
I saw it on Blurb.
Yes, I did self-publish it.
Mhm.
I did put it up on there, so you can see the whole series
I
there.
might get it.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
because it's so funny.
yeah.
There was something where he was like, he was buried under sheets, and all you could see were his like
Two
two
legs.
legs.
Yeah, yes. That was his caption. I hogged the bed, but you weren't there.
Yes, which was so
Yeah.
sad. But cute at the same time,
Yeah.
and cute and light, I have to say.
Yes,
But the
I know.
caption turns it on its head.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun to do. It's definitely a very different. It looks like two different photographers, right?
It does.
Yeah.
But isn't
Mhm.
that what we're all about, right?
Is
So
it really?
well, I think so. I mean, what one person is flat? Name one person who's
Yeah.
just one way.
Yeah, you're right. I think we all are multifaceted, but for some reason, I think this industry just trains us to need to be one kind of photographer. It's kind of like sometimes it screws me up, I have to admit.
Whether it's our rep or whoever it is, they need to be able to market you in one way or another. And I
Yeah.
think clients need to know what they'll get from you. And apparently, if you only do one thing and you do it over and over and over again, then
Yeah.
they're comforted by that. But I mean, there have been lots of other photographers who've pivoted right from one. They might be doing lifestyle and then they switch to food, or they might be doing interiors and then they switch to something else. So it's possible, but it sure takes a lot of test shoots and rebranding. It's an
Yeah.
expensive turnaround, but it can be
Yeah.
done. So you studied photography in high school, and then you go to university, and when you come out, you don't go into photography right away.
Right.
Can you tell us what
Right.
happens when you
Yeah, it's
graduate?
just I'm a total victim of listening to your parents, you know? My parents are immigrants to this country, and chasing a dream in photography or in art is not what they would have liked, it's for a lot of immigrant, kids of immigrant families, it's about survival, and getting a real job. So I guess I fell into that trap of you know falling in that pressure. I should have never have listened to them. Actually, when kids tell me nowadays, like, "Oh, I want to do this," I'm like, "Yeah, do it, do it. Don't listen to your parents. Just do it. Go for it." You know.
So you worked in
So
marketing for a few years.
I did. I went to university for marketing. Started my career in advertising. So I was in the corporate side and I always did photography on the side, and I'll always do it no matter what I need to do to pay the bills, which is really the primary reason why I went corporate side, was just, to be able to live and pay the bills and such. Eventually, I got very antsy and unfulfilled in that kind of career track. And there are times in my life where I've jumped back and forth. So, I've hit points where I need to go. And so the first time I left the corporate world, I went to go intern for Mary Ellen Mark. So Mary Ellen Mark, for I think, is probably really well known. I mean, she's a legend, and it was an amazing time, and I learned a ton from her. But that's how I got started in the photo industry. Is I started on an internship, worked for her for about a year, and then she's a documentary photographer, and this is when, of course, this was some time ago when she was alive. She's no longer alive anymore. But then I went on to started assisting. I was a photo assistant to Craig Cutler. Craig Cutler, he's still pumping it out, still huge. He's an advertising photographer. I was like his like a third assistant, you know. So
I've been there.
I,
I've been a
yeah,
third assistant.
yeah. I learned on the job, really. I kind of, feel like I was learning as I go, or was starting to discover my personal vision, shooting my own work, as you do. And I started to feel more and more confident in the kind of work that I was producing on my own. It didn't look anything like Mary Ellen Mark or Craig Cutler's. My work didn't look anything like theirs. Learned a lot and started to feel a little bit kind of coming into my own, coming of age a little bit of being, a photographer. But it took a while. I was shooting on sets, on film sets, as a stills photographer for a while. And at that point, someone said to me, "No, Susan, you got to shoot your own work. You're just, as stills on set is fine, but you're capturing someone else's vision."
Mm.
So that stuck with me. That advice kicked me in the butt to go and shoot my own work. So I'm grateful. I learned a lot with a lot of these different types of jobs, and experiences. That my time on film sets was also very instrumental, because I still am very much. I loved that experience of working in. You become a family because you're with,
You spend so much time together.
yeah, you're fit minimum 15 hours a day with these people, so you end up becoming very, very close. So I do miss that part, that photography is a little bit more solo, I think, than the film community.
Mm. I do
So
think
I do love
so.
that.
I mean,
Yeah,
the time where it doesn't feel so solo is when all of you are on set, right?
yeah,
Or you're having pre-light or whatever. I would love to hear what you learned from working with Mary Ellen Mark and with Greg
yeah,
Cutler.
yeah. Oh, amazing experiences. Mary Ellen Mark taught me so much in working really hard. That woman never stopped. I mean, she was, I would guess, like in her 50s or 60s at the time that I was with her. And that woman was just a machine. She never got tired. I mean, we were pushing around her equipment everywhere, and we were exhausted and stuff, but she was just like never ever like was tired. I never saw her sat down. I mean, she was always on her feet, pacing either in the studio or outside.
What shoes
But
did she wear?
I don't know, but she was just like, she was full of energy all the time. So I just admired her energy, her determination, her focus, her discipline. I had some amazing experiences with her. She covered 9/11 when that happened, and she was called down to ground zero to go photograph the firehouses down there. And, lower Manhattan was completely closed at the time. And I didn't think I was going to go, but here I am walking towards the New York Fire Department had a truck that they were going to escort us down. And so we opened the door, there's one seat. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going. Mary Ellen's going to sit there. And so Mary Ellen gets into the back seat, and then she slaps her lap, meaning, come here, sit on my lap. So I like to say I sat on Mary Ellen Mark. That's my claim to fame.
That's amazing. I mean, for those of us who were alive during that time, we all remember the day when
Mm-hmm.
those planes hit the tower. Gosh, what was it like? Can you tell us the
Yeah.
story about arriving and to ground zero?
Yeah, it was surreal. It's very haunting.
Tell us exactly, like, once you got out of the van, and or
Yeah.
either whether when you were approaching and then when you get out, and then maybe also talk about the smell.
Got out of the car, and it's just unrecognizable. I couldn't tell what I was looking at because everything was all in this big tangled mess, heap of rubbish. It's just like a mountain high of rubbish, twisted metal, scary. And the vivid thing I remember from that is actually smell. Smell has such a powerful trigger for memory. I don't know if you agree, but the smell of gasoline, asbestos, death, you know, all of that stuff. It was surreal. It was a real surreal moment. And we were given hard hats and a mask to wear. So we were kind of protected, but things were still moving and shifting there. It was kind of dangerous to go down there because, you know, those neighboring towers were also damaged and could fall any minute. There was a big black veil draped over one of the buildings, and that was a powerful image. I remember it's like a veil of a widow, you know, that you would wear over your face. There was one over one of the buildings, so I remember that as a vivid memory. And we worked really quickly, though. We were shooting one of the firehouses. I remember dust flying around in the air. It was a beautiful day, sunny, strange feeling. Yeah, not something everybody should experience. But I have one more Mary Ellen Mark story that I'll tell that's
Please share.
related to this. So her I think I forget which assignment it was, New York Times or Time magazine. It was one of the news magazines that she was shooting the story for. We were shooting another firehouse up near the East Village, somewhere around like 12th or 13th or 14th Street, somewhere around the East Village. And we were there very early in the morning to photograph the outside of a firehouse that had a lot of firefighters die, you know, and people had flowers all laid in front of the firehouses. So that's what we were photographing. And that was in the day when we were shooting Polaroid first. And so it's set up, we're there and we shoot a Polaroid, and two minute later, we peeled it. There was a figure in front of the firehouse, a blurred figure of a person. You could see their leg. You can't see their face, but it's blurred. And we looked at each other and said, no one walked in front of the camera. Did you see anyone walking in front of the camera? No. No one had seen anybody walk in front of that camera. Yeah. So I think as we all did, we think we photographed a ghost. It's wild, isn't it?
That is wild.
Yeah. True
Wow.
story. But yeah, that was my time with Mary Ellen Mark. With Craig Cutler, I got my taste of full-on commercial workflow and studio. He does big advertising shoots, still life and advertising. So that was a complete opposite from working with someone like Mary Ellen, who shot documentary, people, you know. So I got to experience very polar opposites in the industry.
What sometimes I think is really helpful when you have two very different work experiences,
Yeah.
you learn somehow what not to do, as well as some of the things that you should do.
Yeah.
And I often think that having a horrible boss is more meaningful than having a good boss. I really do believe that, because you learn all the things that you should not be doing. What did you learn from working with Greg and Mary Ellen in terms of systems or ways of operating that you now have merged into your business?
I think you do just naturally pick up things, I guess, you know, even though I don't shoot documentary or still life usually. I think you just end up kind of absorbing some of these things with Mary Ellen. I just sort of the work ethic and her way of working with people. I probably picked up little cues from there. And Craig Cutler, I learned a lot in the technical part. You know, he's a master lighting guy. So I learned a ton about lighting and more of the technical aspects of it. Beautiful, more stylized and slick imagery. So I probably borrowed a little bit of that into my work too. My work tends to be more stylized. One of my heroes, Melanie Pullen, photographer who shoots very dark stuff, she said during the Palm Springs Photo Festival that we went to, she described her work as creating moments. It's not capturing moments. She's creating moments. And that really resonated with me because I think that's the type of things that I try to do in my work, which is very different from Mary Ellen Mark. She's there capturing moments as a documentary photographer.
Do you think that has a lot to do with your influences as a child and all of the films that you were really into. I remember reading that you love Hitchcock, and I think you mentioned that earlier too during our interview. I'm assuming that has to influence you in ways that you can't even
Oh, totally.
yeah.
Some of my biggest influences are filmmakers. Wong Kar-wai was
I
a
was going to say that your
yeah,
work reminds me of In the
yes,
Mood for Love.
yes, which
Oh,
is one of my
it's
favorite
my,
movies.
yes, I
Yes,
can watch that
yes,
movie so back to back. I love that
yes,
movie.
exactly. Yeah, you're totally on my level then. Yeah, it's stuff like that. I was huge. I was a big foreign film nerd too. Pedro Almodovar, which your work with the colors of your work, Martine, remind me of that. And I love that because I love the color in Pedro Almodovar's work.
Oh my, I didn't even
Yeah.
realize that. I'll have to go
Yeah.
back and look at his work. His
Yeah.
work. You're right.
Yeah. He
Oh
does these
wow,
really bright
women.
colors.
Yes,
Yeah.
women
Women
on
on the
the verge.
verge
Yes.
of a nervous breakdown. Yeah. So he had a huge influence on me as well. Yeah. Because I love color too. I think we all were, all love black and white photography. But for me, I see in color. Yeah. It's definitely color for me. Even though I love black and white, because Mary Ellen shot mostly black and white photography.
Well, I remember reading something about how the human eye sees a lot more subtlety than we think.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been loving and gravitating towards really underexposing my work, my images, because I really want more subtlety. And I
Okay.
want your eye to work.
Yes, yes, for sure. I have a very long process though. Sometimes I sit on ideas for a really long time until I become obsessed with them, The modern fairy tales stuff took me a while to bring to life.
Can you
Um,
tell us a little bit more about the modern fairy tales?
Yeah, sure. I was reading a book, The Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Murakami, and it's a really weird book. So I just love the weird stuff, right? If you can kind of tell, I love David Lynch, Murakami, that stuff. So The Wind Up Bird Chronicle, I was reading at the time, and I was running in the park, and I was starting to imagine all these scenes in my head as I was running. I pitched the idea of retelling classic fairy tales to a friend who had a handbag that she was launching. Let's retell these classic fairy tales, but in a modern way. Because her handbags were described as classic silhouettes with a pop of modern color. So I'm like, great, let's use that concept into something where we retell a fairy tale. So I just started I started reading a lot of the fairy tales too, which also was like shocking to read the real stories behind these fairy tales. So the original source material was a big inspiration. As we kind of talked about earlier, a lot of pop culture references were kind of,
True
you
Blood.
know, fed in there. True Blood, 6 Feet Under, Hitchcock, Wes Anderson. Yeah, for some reason she let me shoot, like, Wizard of Oz, she said
Yes, that one's my favorite.
right, but like, you smile and you laugh, right, but it's like a dead witch,
Yes,
right?
but
I
her
photographed so,
legs are in such a way
yeah.
that's so comical.
Yeah, it's funny, right? So that's the sort of dark humor, my brand of dark humor, I hope to continue with my work. And I think that, as kind of morbid as it is, I hope people see get a little giggle out of it.
Well, I wanted to just remind myself of them, and so I just pulled them up. I love how you how you use the frog and the prince. No, the frog and the, what is it called? The princess and the frog
Yeah, I think Disney turned that into something like that,
with Princess
but it's
Tiana. But
yeah.
that one I think is the hardest for me because the frog is dead. Why did you kill the frog?
You see, why can't I shoot happy people running through a field? with the sun behind them. No, I have to go and shoot a dead frog. So it's really funny. I kind of crack myself up that I find myself shooting things like bugs and dead frogs and snakes. But yes, the frog prints came about because I read the Brothers Grimm, who were the original authors of that story. And I found it so fascinating that the original story is so different from the Disney one.
Can you tell us more?
Sure. The Disney version is the princess kisses the frog and the frog turns into a prince and they kiss and they live happily ever after, right? That doesn't happen in the real story. It doesn't.
Oh,
It's fascinating.
what happens in the real story? Like that was a cliffhanger there. What happens?
So in the original true story, she doesn't kiss the frog. She ends up throwing the frog against the wall in the moment of anger and spite, because she's a little bit of a spoiled princess. So she kills the frog. And I read that and I'm like, oh my God, I need to shoot that. So I went looking for a dead frog as a prop. Yeah, and it was kind of funny. I went to my local pet store. I was like, hey, you have any, frogs that just didn't make it? And they're like, yeah, we have a long waiting list. I'm like, really? I was like number 20 on this long list. I was like, I'm never getting this dead frog. So then I asked a friend and she's like, yeah, just Google it. Just Google frog specimen. And there you go. There's like these places that sell frogs to schools for like, classroom, dissections and stuff. So I ended up, calling them. I'm like, hey, can I buy a frog? And they're like, yeah, sure. How many? I'm like, one. So I bought two, but yeah. And they came to me in their formaldehyde bags and it was kind of gross. I kept them in my fridge. I couldn't face it until the day that I was going to shoot this. And yeah, it was kind of hard. It's like, as much as I'm working with bugs and frogs and snakes, it's not pleasant. I don't really love dead frogs and I don't love bugs and I don't love snakes. So, but I find myself working with them quite often. It was fun to shoot though. A lot of people ask me, did you really kill a frog? I'm like, no. What kind of person do you think I am?
So for most of these, they do look like sets, except for Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah, that was shot on a park location. Yeah, those most are in a studio or a makeshift studio, like in an office building. That the handbag shoot, some of it was shot inside their offices. The frog prints was shot in my apartment. The stuff, the motion work I did with the snake, that was shot in a studio at Sandbox Studios in San Francisco, actually.
And then there was the one for, is it Drizella, right?
Yeah, yes.
That one, because I remember seeing the motion for that one. Where did you shoot that?
That also was shot at Sandbox Studios in San Francisco. They did us a huge favor. There's multiple times now. Charlie Mayer, who was just so gracious with letting people do test shoots there. So we were able to secure the space like on a weekend when there's no, jobs being shot there. And they let us go in there and haul our, crew and equipment there. And we shot Drizella over a weekend. And Eve, the one with the snake, we also shot on a different weekend. Yeah, it's that motion work is just a bigger set. You multiply everything by 10. We had many more people, and the grip and the camera and stuff is just way on a bigger scale. So,
can we talk about going from doing stills to doing motion?
Yeah.
Was that a huge learning curve for you, or did you?
For sure. Oh my God, yes. But I've always wanted to shoot motion stuff, just because I'm so heavily influenced by film. And my first kind of project with motion was Drizella, which is an extension of modern fairy tales because Drizella is the stepsister of Cinderella. And that too is an interesting story. You should give that one a read too.
Yes, it has a lot to do with toes being severed.
That's
Again, dark.
That's right. Yes, yes. So Drizella was my first time experimenting with that. I learned a ton, I learned a ton doing that. It was so much fun though. I enjoyed it so much. And I was just getting hooked on doing more projects like that.
So it
It,
seems like
mhm.
you did the initial few stills for the Modern Fairy Tales project, but
Yeah,
then you continued it, right?
I continued it. That's right. Yes. I shot years later. I have continued it actually. The Frog Prince was a few years later. Gisela was a separate time as well. I just love it. I think there's just so much source, inspiration. I'd love to do Little Mermaid.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah, because the real story is really fucked up
It
too.
is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. That one's Hans Christian Andersen, not Brothers
Mm-hmm.
Grimm, but that one's so dark. But I've never shot in a pool before. But like that would
Fair.
be really like interesting to do.
I used to love that movie, the Disney version,
Uh
the
huh.
original Disney version. And since then, when you look back and you think, wow, she gave her voice up for a man. How is that okay?
Exactly.
We have not embraced Disney as much as I thought that I would with our son, because I feel like some of the lessons that are
Mm-hmm.
imparted on young men and on young
Mm-hmm.
girls is just not something that I want to pass on through my
Mm-hmm. Good for you.
parenting, because
Yeah.
it's like, a guy is supposed to be the one to be the savior, and then the
Yeah.
girl is waiting around to be saved, and
Yeah.
and there are very few other women roles for women, and all the roles other for women are women being very, very mean.
Yeah.
i
Good for you. Yeah. I think we have to control the narrative a little
i
bit
think
more. And
so.
yeah, it would, and that's why these stories can be, I think, retold in an interesting way. But I'm also conscious not getting too close to another photographer who already is doing this. Do you know Dina
Is
Goldstein?
she the one who did the
Yeah.
modern ones of, what happens after? Is that
Fallen Princesses
Fallen
is
Princesses?
hers.
Is that
Yeah.
the, yes, I know that
Yeah.
one.
I love it. And I have to say I was not aware of her work when I started on mine. And I respect her work so much. I'm a huge fan of hers. It's hysterical. It's
It
dark
is.
and
It's dark
funny.
and funny.
Yeah, I love it. So I kind of don't want to go too close to her, what she's already done, unless I can do it differently.
Have you
Yeah.
heard of Circle Round? It's a
What's that?
podcast put on by
Mm.
WBUR in
Mm-hmm.
Boston, and
Mm-hmm.
it's they retell stories around the world. They're fairy tales, but usually more culturally specific. So
Mm.
from tales from the First Nation, tales from India, from Mexico, from just all around the world, from Africa. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to see a more wholesome telling of fairy
Mm.
tales, where
Okay.
cooperation is highlighted rather than being saved, and
Yeah.
how thinking on your feet and is also highlighted, critical thinking, and it's really good. We love it. We listen every Tuesday, and it
Okay.
might be good for you to. I'll send you.
I'm
Can I
gonna
send
check
you
it
my
out.
favorites?
Oh yes, please. I just wrote it down too. Circle round. I'm gonna definitely check it out. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it's
Please send me.
well done.
Yeah.
So can we talk about Saatchi?
Okay.
Because you created this series, and this series gets to go on and get quite a bit of
Mm-hmm.
acclaim. And I should
Yeah.
also mention that, listeners, if you would like to purchase a few prints of Susan's, you can go on Saatchi. I will have a link. I actually, in preparation for the show notes, I already have the link, so
Oh,
people
cool.
can go and check that out and see if they want to support you by going through Saatchi. But can you tell us about awards? Because, well, I'll stop there. Can you
Yeah.
tell us about
Sure.
how you've become such a lauded photographer?
It's so funny, that series, Modern Fairy Tales. I'm so proud of that body of work. Not only was it a commercial assignment, but it also had resonated enough, in the fine art world, that I've been able to show it and it's been recognized. I've just been so lucky, I think, that it had an audience, that people wanted to show it and publish it. So it's had a really good run, and I've continued it with the Frog Prince was a late addition to it, and that one got accepted into the Miami Art Week. So I went down to Miami last year to show with ASMP in a group show for that. So it's been fantastic seeing this have such life. And Drizella, I've just, you know, was my first motion project, but I just entered it to see what would happen, and that got accepted in a couple of film festivals. So it's nice to feel like it's resonating and it's getting some traction. I just feel like if you're proud of the work that you're doing, you just want to try to get as many people to see it. So I do tend to try to enter my work into shows, into competitions. The last work that I was lucky to show was Making America Great Again, which is the sort of, you know, dig on the Trump administration through just the conceptual, you know, still life of the American flag melting in the form of what a lot of kids in America grew up with, is eating that popsicle when they were a kid. I depicted it melting away as sort of a commentary. So that one, you know, the one the yellow
It's such a
background.
beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
print. It's striking as an image because at first you don't know what you're looking at.
Yeah, it looks fun and colorful, like summery, you know, but when you read the title that's with it, it's actually, it's got a deeper meaning to it. So that one, I guess because of what the times that we live in now, it's that piece has had a lot of recognition, and has been shown in a few places, and yeah, I'm lucky that people like it.
I
Yeah.
I love how you
Mm.
created a light a light piece of work, and
Yeah,
then it's
and made
not
it
at
really
all.
dark.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm trying not to laugh super loud, but I was like, "That's awesome, Susan."
It's so me, right? Yeah.
It's perfect.
I know, even though I'm not a still life shooter, or I'm not a food shooter either, you know, but
How did
it's
you make it?
my. Mm.
How did you make it melt? Did you just leave it?
Oh, yeah, I shot it on a hot day on a piece of plexi, and it just gave me this beautiful melt by itself. And I just kept photographing it, like in intervals. So over the course of it frozen, and then to it melting all the way.
Mm.
And it
How
just was, yeah.
how do you come
So,
up with these ideas? I ask because
mm,
that's the great mystery. How do we get
yeah.
these ideas? But how did you come up with that idea specifically?
Well, you know, that one was a total happy accident. You know, my creative process is, as I referred to before, actually pretty belabored, and I kind of think it over and overthink it, and I storyboard and I draw it to death, and I sit on it until I get obsessed, and then finally I actually shoot it. It can take a long time. That Making America Great Again was a total like accident, where I was just, one day I was like, oh, these popsicles are so colorful and pretty. Let me just see what happens when I shoot it. It was a total experiment. And then when I photographed it, I was like, this thing is melting so beautifully. It's got this like painterly kind of thing going on with it. And when I realized the symbolism of the American flag melting away, and I don't know, Trump probably said something stupid that day or something, and I'm like, that's what the title of this piece is. It's so it kind of was something I stumbled on. You know, you referenced that before. Sometimes as creatives, you don't know necessarily what you're going to create, but sometimes you kind of get there by accident. And those are great. I love that when that happens. I wish that would happen more often with me, because I tend to overthink things a lot.
You were talking about your process, about sitting, having the idea, sitting with it, storyboarding
Yeah.
it. Is that usually
Yeah.
your whole process?
Yeah. It can take a long time, which is my downfall. I'm not as prolific as I'd like to be. But yeah, I usually will have an idea. I'll usually sketch it, draw it. And I'm a terrible drawer. So it's usually like stick figures. um, so something pretty simple, sketch it several different ways, think about it, sit on it for a while, talk about it endlessly with people, which is really bad. and then and then sometimes I can find other people who want to collaborate with me on it, then I can take off, because it's really hard to do these projects by myself. These are, as you know, it's never a team of one. It's been, if I've been fortunate enough to have a collaborator with me, usually is when the rubber hits the road, that I can actually make things happen.
It's rare that
And
it's a team of one, right? Like if you're
yeah,
doing, especially
yeah,
commercial photography, it's not a team of one at all.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. But a lot of these projects are, for me, a lot of them are self-funded. So I don't have the luxury of, hiring a whole crew. So I do have a reliance on just people who want to make great stuff and want to collaborate or want to make stuff for their book. Or, I was working with a crew up in San Francisco. They were all kind of stuck doing like catalog stuff that maybe they were kind of a little itching for something more creative. So I fell into a group of people like that they just wanted to make something creative. So I was lucky that they are all on board with me on doing stuff like that. So it's important to find your tribe and your community
it's
of
so important.
collaborators.
Um,
Yeah.
how do you, the work that you're creating, how do you balance that with some of the commercial work that you do?
Well, I have to be honest, I don't do a ton of commercial work. I've had to sacrifice a lot of my desire to do this full time by doing other, like corporate work stuff to pay the bills. It's been largely, I've been shooting a lot of the work I shoot is for me.
And that's the best
And
way to create too.
yeah, yeah, it is. And it's just maybe the more fulfilling and creative kind of work.
Mm.
But I really would love that challenge, and I think I can do it in a brief with a commercial work, because like the handbag, that's a perfect example. The handbag shoot where I'd love to combine my kind of way of seeing things with a brand. I would love to tell that story.
Well,
Yeah,
hopefully someone will listen to
yeah,
this and hear you and call you
I'm
up.
game. I'm
Yeah.
game. Yeah.
Can we talk about failure?
Oh yeah, I feel it every day.
Oh no. Well, I think that we in our culture here in the US, we prioritize success and hustling and getting things done. Sometimes we just don't. And sometimes things just don't go the way it's supposed to go. Can you talk about like a point in your career where things just didn't go the way that you thought it would go? And what lessons did you learn,
Yeah.
if any, from that?
I mean, I've always had this struggle in my life of almost living two lives. My desire to be, work in photography full time, and the other life of paying rent and whatnot. So the times that I've hit the point where, I'm able to pay rent and everything, but I'm creatively unfulfilled, that's when I feel like a complete failure. And I've hit that road a few times, fork in the road. So I think, I'm always happier to jump back into my true love, which is photography, and I've realized that, and I've known it for all my life. This is, despite me, getting into motion and film and stuff, my true love is still photography.
Mm.
But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. I know that it's, for a lot of photographers, it's hard to make a living. So it's okay to take this sort of pay the bills type of job. It's totally okay. And sometimes I felt like a failure all the time, but I realized that it's enabled me to actually create the work that I want to create. So maybe it's not such a bad thing that I had to sacrifice a few years of my life.
I have done so many
Yeah.
jobs
Have
to
you? You've
support
lived?
my
Yeah.
passion, to support photography and getting to where I almost feel like I've made it. I'm not there yet. And I still take lots of jobs on the side, lots of
Mm-hmm.
things that just don't appear on my
Mm-hmm.
website that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that perhaps more people do that work they let
Mm-hmm.
on, whether it is taking a part-time job that
Mm-hmm.
has nothing to do with the arts. I used to do catering.
Did you
I used to do
really?
catering, yeah. I mean,
Oh,
I didn't do cater, but I was one of the servers,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
passing things out at weddings and so on.
Yeah,
And I've
yeah,
photographed
yeah.
weddings too. I've like
Yes.
worked at a car rental agency.
Uh-huh. I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one then. We've all had all kinds of strange jobs.
You are not. No,
Yeah,
you're not the
yeah.
only
I know,
one.
and I photographed a wedding too. Can you believe? Can you me shooting? Person who shoots dead frogs. I photographed a wedding before too.
How did it go? I'm curious.
It's funny. Like when people see my work, I find it odd when someone asks me to shoot like their wedding, or I got approached by someone who wanted me to shoot like this family and toddler clothing. I'm like, wow, have you seen my work? I don't get it. I don't get it.
But
Some people who approach me.
do you think it's the skill level that's there, and not only the skill level, but a taste preference that's there, an alignment in the two, and
Is that
that
what it is?
and
Because
that the outcome of what they want isn't as important, right? Because what they want is your eye, and you tell the story in a way that they want it to be told. Your inspiration and your actual fingerprint will come through, but just it will show in a different way. I would like to think that it's like the popsicle. If that
yeah.
popsicle, the melted popsicle and all those beautiful colors, if it didn't have a caption,
Mm-hmm.
would we see it as morbid,
No,
or would
we
we
would
see it
see
as
it.
dark? I don't want.
Yeah,
We're gonna strike the morbid because I don't think that's morbid. But would we see it as dark and
probably not.
the
Not.
dissolving of a
Mm-hmm.
dream? We wouldn't,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. It doesn't have that context. Yeah,
Yes.
you're right. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's what it is. I'm always surprised when people want me to shoot like their babies or something.
Maybe anyone who's been a parent knows how dark parenting can be. At 2 o'clock in the morning when the baby's still crying, I could see, I could see why. Um,
Good point.
so
um,
Susan, I know that you moved to Brooklyn, right? And you are learning a new skill. So can you tell us what that is and a little bit more about what your decision was that influenced um,
yeah,
going to New York?
sure. So I think with some photographers who are moving into more motion based work, as I had been for the last few years, I got really excited about shooting video, and I just love that whole process. So and that process includes the editing part of it. So I started to get into editing a lot more, editing my stuff, editing my friends' stuff, and I really enjoyed that skill set of editing. I think can open up a whole bunch of opportunities. So I decided to take it seriously. I went to a school in Brooklyn to study editing, and took a summer course there, and worked on films there. So that was more film editing. Also edit short form stuff on my own. So I've had a mix of both editing short form and long form. And I just loved it. It's great. It's been fantastic. So I hope I can bring more to the table when I work with people, because not only can I shoot, but I can edit. I think it's a great thing for people to pick up now, especially now during a pandemic when there isn't a lot of work right now, is to expand your skill set. And editing, I think, is always needed. There's so much video content out there now, so hopefully that'll become of some use. But yeah, I just it's almost like they talk about editing as like as writing, because it's the last rewrite, but it's also a view into directing as well, because as an editor, you see everything. You see all the takes, you see all the footage, all the good and the bad. As you're putting it together, it is kind of like a director role, where you get to put a cohesive narrative, story, or flow, or motion, or feeling together. So that's what I really love about editing. So yeah, I'm doing a little bit of editing work now, in addition to looking for more photography work.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. because it's what you said about it being editing is the last rewrite, and we know how important retouching is. A photo isn't done when
Yeah.
you've taken it. It's kind of like it's that the darkroom piece, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
one of the steps to making the image. And I've started to look into the specifics of movie making to influence my photography work, so I could just
Hmm.
become a stronger photographer. And understanding the edit has been something that I'm interested in too. Do you mind sharing
Yeah.
the name of the school where you took the class?
I have sad news about that. The school just announced they are closing.
Okay.
They just didn't make it through the pandemic. They were called the Edit Center. I'm heartbroken over it.
So I'd love to chat a bit about how you're doing, because we're living in interesting times,
We sure
um,
are.
with COVID and Black Lives Matter. How have you been? How have you been keeping your spirits up?
It's been a roller coaster of emotions for sure. I felt like everybody has, like through the whole range of emotions, but on the creative side, I had to create something. I don't know if you were able to create under quarantine, but I ended up as scrappy as I could, shooting a video, which I can send you the link to as well. It's all shot in quarantine. With I don't have any of my things with me since I was kind of stranded in California when the lockdowns happened. All my stuff is in Brooklyn, and I have some of it here. So I had to be scrappy of the stuff I've created while in quarantine. But I shot a video in and around my house, just with time slowed down. So it's just a reflection on time slowed down, isolation, loneliness, and just sort of guided by. I just started to notice the light traveling around the house. So it's kind of reflective and meditative. So I shot that piece, and then with all those sort of terrible things happening, in addition to the pandemic, the other stuff happening every time Trump opens his mouth. I also I just published out another a photograph that I did. That was interesting. I think it's going to be an extension of Making America Great Again. What I did is I photographed a bleach martini with some
Yes, I
hydroxy
saw that.
chloroquine pills. Yes. Um,
That was amazing. I was just like, yes,
yeah.
girl.
Yeah. Thank you. I should have shot it earlier, but I don't know why. I don't know why it came to me, but I just thought, my brand of dark humor again is like, let's, people are shooting, it's summer, people are shooting sangria and, lemonade and stuff, but no, Susan's got to shoot a bleach martini. So I,
I loved that image because it's exactly how I'm feeling right now.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
I'm having a hard time making happy images, honestly, because
Yeah.
I'm sad during this
Right.
time. But at the same time,
Oh.
I have to be hopeful too, because this
Hmm.
is my country, darn it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not having it.
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
things to be better. And so then I've had to ask my question, what do I want? And how can I do that through my work? One of the things that I'd like for you to consider is a challenge that I'll be sending your way. I think for in the commercial, or at least in the photography world and in film, there's always those movies that are like all American.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we all know what that means, right? Like
Yes,
it's like
yes, yes.
the Midwest and blonde
Yes.
hair, blue eyes.
Right,
And
right.
I'm really curious as to like what some of my colleagues who are creators
Hmm.
would do if I gave them to the assignment to create something that is all American, but not the all American that we were spoon fed,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
What would that
Mhm.
look like?
Yes.
So if
I
that's
love that
something you'd be
idea.
interested in doing, please, because I'm getting a whole bunch of people
Uh-huh.
to do that because I'm
That's a
curious.
fantastic idea.
Yes, and I'm just really curious about people who come from different sectors in the field of art, and what would they
Mhm.
create? Yeah, whether
Mhm.
it is people who are concentrating in 2D art, fiber arts, and
Mhm.
photography, film, and so on. What would
Mhm.
that look like? I'm
Mhm.
just really curious.
That's a fantastic idea. I love it. I could see a whole exhibition around that.
Well, I have a few questions to ask you
Hmm.
prior to
Okay.
us hanging up.
Okay.
What's your favorite movie? The one you go to kind of like help yourself get back into to your why and to who you really are.
Oh, what's my favorite movie? Oh, that's so hard to answer. There's too many. I mean, we talked about one, right? In the Mood for Love.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
But I'm not the kind of person who goes back to rewatch movies that much, you know? I'm so I don't know if I have one that I go back to. I have a range too of stuff that I love. I like science fiction stuff too, like Blade Runner 2049.
The lighting in
You know,
that was
the
crazy good.
yeah, the
The
DP Roger
oh my
Deakins.
gosh, yeah, that the
Yeah.
photography. Oh my word.
Yeah, that film actually inspired me to shoot Being is a motion work for me, the lone man
Oh
in
yes.
black with a hat. That one was inspired by Blade Runner. Yes. So I definitely do draw upon little references of things that I get really excited about.
So, what is the best way for us to keep up with you and all the things that you're doing?
Oh yeah, you can. Let's connect. Let's connect over the Insta. I'm at Susan J Chen, and then my funnier, sillier stuff is at Corn Dracula. Or you can check out my website www.susanjchen.com.
Perfect. Susan, thank you so much for coming on. I've loved catching up with you again and learning more about you and what inspires you.
Thank you so much, Martine. I can't wait to have drinks with you again on a rooftop somewhere in this world again.